Well, for more on this, we're joined now by geopolitical analyst Christopher Ogunmodede from Lagos. Christopher, these latest kidnappings of some 61 people, what more do we know about them?
Well, these are mostly young people, young students at a school who were kidnapped by a roving gang of bandits. Bandits tend to be a catch-all term used to describe these groups of armed people who move around on vehicles typically to sort of strike shock and awe attacks in villages, towns, schools, farm communities. So, a lot of the information isn't really clear at the moment because these attacks, happened relatively recently, and there isn't a lot of information out there. But so far, that's what we know about the groups the kinds of people who allegedly were behind this attack and their targets.
And do their targets, the targets of these armed bandits, as you refer to them, do they tend to target the same groups? Does it always tend to be students?
Their targets generally are students because, for one thing, it's a very opportunistic endeavor. It's a very large. Students tend to be clustered in large groups in schools, many of which tend to be relatively distant from the communities they come from, certainly distant from where security posts, police stations, checkpoints, and things like that. A lot of them being that they happen in northern Nigeria, which has a much bigger land space than in the south. And given Nigeria's dearth of adequate police and security agencies, the geography, the numbers, and all of these things put together certainly creates a window of opportunity for these groups. So they target students for sure, but they target, frankly, anyone who they think is a sitting duck and is fair game, because when they take you, and they can easily seek ransom payments for the abductions, which they very often get.
Why is it that if students do tend to be the target, a larger police presence isn't put in place around the students?
To a very large extent, that's because policing is a zero-sum game, more so in a place like Nigeria, where, as I said, there are just not enough police officers, around the country. Nigeria is a very large country, but its police force is actually very small. And as I say, for every police officer you deploy to a school, community, or some other place, that means police officers not being deployed elsewhere. And the security dilemmas in many of these places like Kaduna and other parts of northwest Nigeria are so vast. So, the trade-offs, security and political elites in Kaduna and other parts of the country have simply not found the sweet spot. And so also there's the reality that in many communities, people don't want police officers near their kids, frankly speaking, because they don't trust them. They believe, in many places, they believe that the police is complicit with these kidnappings. And, because they just believe, how do these things happen so repeatedly and no one seems to have an answer? So when you combine the lack of trust between local communities and the security agencies and the political elites as well, and the fact that people just do not believe that the police do not know anything about it, and the unwillingness of political elites to, deploy police officers to school areas, thus leaving other places vulnerable. That's why you have the status quo.
And Christopher, as we were hearing there from our correspondent Randolph Nogle's report, that kidnapping in Nigeria remains a low risk, a high reward business, with the perpetrators very rarely brought to justice. Why are they so rarely brought to justice?
Because the security agencies and the political class simply doesn't have a great hold on who these people are. They know about them in theory. They know, who they are, but in terms of creating actionable intelligence and operations to actually get them, they've been unable to do that. A lot of the information about these who these people are and these groups are still very much remains in hearsay and speculation and conjecture and a great deal of conspiracy theory. And as I say, there is a lack of, I hesitate to say political will, but perhaps I will use that phrase, political will, on the part of the political class and the security agencies to admit that there is a problem, because admitting there is such a problem of vast kidnapping and quote-unquote banditry is tantamount to admitting that you have failed at your job, which is protecting lives and property. So there's a kind of game of chicken going on in the political scene and among the security agencies. And, as I say, there are a multiplicity of security dilemmas beside kidnapping that simply makes it, puts the bandits and other violent groups on offense and the security agencies on defense. And as you remember, as I said, there's just not enough security officers, police and otherwise to, man the fields and communities around the country. So it's a bandits field out there, and they will always have those advantages.
Christopher, thank you so much for all those explanations. Very interesting. Christopher Ogunmodede speaking to us from Lagos.